Hello, this should be the quickest, easiest and simplest tutorial for how a network works in Unity. Now you'll see in this scene, all I have is a light source, a camera, and you may not be able to tell, but there is a plane back there. It's really big and you can't fall off of it when you're playing around. You will play as a sphere, so I'm going to drop that in now. So I'm going to create a sphere, just sphere because it's really easy, so I've dropped it into the scene. And I'll have to add some components. One I have to add for it to work properly is network view. That will synchronize it with the network and make sure that people see what they're supposed to see moving around. Something else that I want to add is the rigid body. That just means it'll act like it's not being controlled, but we can move it around and it will bounce off of other things. Normally you don't have the player as a rigid body because they'll play as a walking human, and you don't want a walking human to be bouncing off of props and stuff. That's just not good. But for this case, I want it to be a rigid body. I have 3 code files which I have made them up already. I have a terrible memory. I wouldn't be able to remember what I had to write down for all of them, even though they are incredibly simple. So I've made the sphere, which you're going to play as, and I need to make a prefab for which you will use to spawn the sphere you are. So we'll call that U because it's going to be U. So you've made the sphere, you've given it the network view and rigid body. That's all you need to do with that, and that makes that a prefab. Now I'm just going to delete that out of the area because we don't need that, and we're going to spawn that when we connect to the server. I will make an empty game object to make the spawner, so we'll call this spawn point, and that's where the sphere is going to spawn from once I add the code to it. We'll just, that's a good spot, I'll leave it there. So I'll put the spawner code on it. So it's on there, and we'll just have a look at that spawner code. What it's got is the first variable, well, the only variable, and that's going to be what you're going to put your prefab that I just made in, so that it knows what you're going to spawn. Then you have other functions. You have the ones in blue. There's no other functions after that, by the way. There's just those ones. The server name, not the server names. The function names that are in blue are functions that are built into Unity. I haven't defined them in any other code. Those are just there in Unity. So when I join a server, or when I make a server, or when I disconnect from a server, or when a server kicks me from it, hope they won't do that, these are the things that will happen. I've made another function, spawn a player, which will be called either when you join a server or when you make a server, and that causes network.instantiate, and then it will make a player, which is the variable defined up here, which we will tell it to make another of those prefabs. So it'll make one of those at the same position and rotation as the spawn point, and this last number is the group. And when you make it in a group, you can only see it with other ones in the same group. You're not going to need it for this one, but if you, for instance, had people in different areas of your server where they wouldn't need to see each other's happening, so if one of them went to a different room perhaps, then they don't need to be in the same group, and it won't make them and won't have to calculate it for them in the server. It's an efficiency thing. So the last 2 functions are a little bit more involved, very little bit. When a player disconnects, it means it's not you, it's somebody else. So when they disconnect, that'll be the prefab, that'll be them who has disconnected, and so we come in as this, we are a player as this object. So when we leave, we're called a player, and we tell everyone else we're leaving, and it destroys all of our stuff because we don't need it anymore. Then if we get disconnected from the server, it just destroys everything else. It destroys the network.player, all of the other people, all of the other players and all of their stuff. And it also reloads the level, which will set you up so that you can join another server, or you can host your own server at that point. But it'll get you back to the start. And that's all that is. It's really, really easy. And I hope I've explained it so that you can understand it. I've only learnt about it today, and that's how... And I think it's simple enough that I can understand it, so I think you can probably understand it. Oh, we haven't finished the prefab. We have to put the player controller on it. This is really the most rudimentary I could think of. Well, I didn't try to make it simple, but this is as simple as it really can get. The important difference between just being able to control it with this update is this start function, which says that if network view isn't mine, so if you didn't make the object, if your client didn't make the object, you are not allowed to move it. Otherwise, you'd be able to control any of the other ones. Because your client will make the object when the server tells it to, but it's not kept on the server whether it's made. It's independent. It's on your client. So you don't want to be able to move their stuff. So it'll only be enabled when you make an object. And we'll drop that onto the prefab to make sure that we can control it once it's spawned. You can see the network view and rigid body I added earlier. So we have the spawn point, and what we need to put in is a player. So I'll drop that prefab into there. And that is the spawning all done. And the last thing we need to do, yeah, it's really quick, is add the networking script to the main camera. I'll just add it for now, and then we'll go have a look at it. And that is all it is. It's just what you can see on your screen. I've set the server IP and server port. You can't change it at the moment, but if you want to, you can make GUI options like text fields to change it around. I've kept the server port as a string, even though later it needs to be an integer, because when you make it as a text field, it will be entered as a string, which you then need to change to an integer, which I'll show you just in a second. So on GUI, it's pretty much the same as update, but it's separate counter. So it then checks if you're connected to a network. And if you're not connected to a network, it'll have two options, which is connect and make a new server. Since I didn't tell it where to put them, it'll just put them in the top left-hand corner of the screen. It's just defaults there. They don't go on top of each other, thankfully. It knows what to do. It's pretty clever like that. So those are really the only functions for the network that you need to know. There's a lot of other stuff. Like I said, I've only started doing this today, but everything I found was really complicated. At one point I started downloading a external software for hosting a server, and it just didn't seem right. It didn't seem like that was as simple as it could get. So I dug a bit further, and maybe I'm just really bad at searching for things if that's all I found to begin with. But I eventually found another one, which was also really simple, but I felt it could get much simpler than it was, and that's why I've made this, to show exactly how simple it can be. You've got just makes the button, and if it's clicked, then that means that we will connect to the server IP and server port, and if we want to make a new server, we'll initialize a server. And this one here is the maximum number of connections. So if you're running a server and you don't want too many people in, like you only want 5 people in, you can put 5 there. I don't think it really matters how many you put. It's just going to affect your quality of service to everyone else if there's 100 people in your server. You pass the int, like I said, you got to convert the string to an int, and that's how you do that. And the last one for that is use NAT. NAT is sort of like a firewall, usually on your router. Its only purpose seems to be block things you want, because it doesn't block anything you don't want, because anything you don't want knows how to get past it. For instance, we get past it here by saying, no, we don't want to use it.